This video is going to be about the inherent dangers in having a democracy in a diverse nation. Um, I've already made it clear on this channel that I do not support democracy, and I think that it itself is a bad system of government. Not that it necessarily, um, you know, isn't carried out in the best way, but just that it itself is bad. But I really want to hone in on this point today about diversity and point to why that if you're going to have a democracy, it should at least be in a culturally homogenous area. Whenever you think of a functioning democracy, or at least a democracy as well ran, typically you're thinking of more homogenous countries. And really more so you're thinking about a more homogenous continent such as Europe. And within Europe, the degree of, you know, democratic integrity varies based on the nation, and the nations, it depends based on the cultural homogeneity. If you look at nations like Norway, Finland, Sweden, Iceland, uh, they tend to be a lot more culturally homogenous. Now I know you have ethnic minorities there, like the Swami, not Swami, the Sami. I think Suomi is how you say Finland in Finnish, and you have the Sami, which are a ethnic group that live around there, like in Scandinavia. But what you can see is that for the most part, though, everyone there is the same ethnicity, and so there's no reason, right, for people to get into power. Oh, not only ethnicity, but also religious affiliation. That matters too, and I don't want to leave that out. It's all right. It's not just about the ethnic homogeneity. It's also about the ideological homogeneity. Pretty much everyone in Scandinavia is not only white, they're Scandinavian, whatever respective ethnic group they belong to, but they're also Protestant. And right, so you don't have a large cluster of Catholics or of Orthodox or Muslims or just whatever other type of Christianity or other foreign religions. You don't have a large cluster of that typically, traditionally. Now I know with the migrant crisis across Europe, you're starting to have an influx of people with different cultures who are of different ethnic groups and different ideals. And so now what you're starting to see is that the social contracts which held European society are starting to dissolve and break down. And so you're starting to lead, it's starting to create a more chaotic society. But traditionally, the more democratic things are, right? I mean, not more democratic, but the better democracy is ran is typically in places that are religiously and ethnically homogenous. Um, and you don't even have to have both of them, but you at least have to have one. Preferably, you would have both, right? But at least you have to have one. So, what we can see from this is that it doesn't make sense to have a system of selecting leaders based on popular vote when you know that your nation is diverse. Because what's going to happen is, because look, at our core, humans are tribal. We're very tribalistic. We're going to back our tribe no matter what. And not all people are like this, but a lot of people are. And more people than we may want to admit are like this. And it can manifest in many forms. Sometimes it's just straight up racism. So when you have a diverse nation and you're running things democratically, you're going to have a constant struggle for power between the different factions of society, whether it be race, whether it be ethnicity, whether it be religious slash ideological. You're going to have endless competition. And what that's going to do, as I said in another video, it's going to pull the nation apart. People are going to start just backing their tribe no matter what. It's going to be tribe over truth. And you don't want that. But when you have a society where pretty much everyone is basically the same, you don't really have to worry about that to the same degree as you would with other societies. And you also have disagreements, but it'll mostly be ideological disagreements. So everyone will pretty much agree on the same things, but it'll just be how do we best implement these said things, right? So I imagine most of the tribalism in like Scandinavia would be more so like political parties, right? So kind of like what we have here in America, but America exacerbates this issue mostly because of the racial diversity amongst the American populace. Because Democrats, for example, are seen as the party of minorities, the party of black people, the party of gays, the party of Muslims, the party of Arabs and Indians and Hispanics and women. It's the party of the downtrodden. But Republicans are seen as the party of Christians, of white people, and of men. And so, and there's outliers. Not everyone sees it like that, but that's how a lot of people see it. They really believe that just the Democrats are for the minorities and Republicans hate them. And I think there's truth to both of those claims. And I also think I also think vice versa is true. I think the Democratic Party is very racist. Same with the Republican Party. Um, but I also think that in some ways, Republicans are less racist than Democrats, and Democrats are less racist than Republicans. And I also think that they're both more racist than each other. It just depends on what certain aspect we're talking about, and that's something I'll get to in a later video. But what I'm getting at though is that when you just look globally, the more diverse a nation is, typically, it just doesn't democracy doesn't work as well. And I think this is partially one of the reasons why Africa is still so poor. Um, Even like 60, maybe going to 70 years after colonialism, it's not just European intervention. It also has to do with the fact that a lot of African countries are trying to replicate this Westphalian nation state democratic system in a place where it just doesn't belong. It doesn't belong in Africa. Uh, in Africa, if you want a nice nation, a nice developed nation, then you're not going to be able to rule democratically in most parts of Africa. In fact, if we look at the best governed democracies in Africa, they're typically the more homogenous African countries. And see, and this is important because Africa has the most ethnic diversity out of all the continents, right? In Nigeria alone, there's 250 ethnic groups. 250 alone. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's more ethnic groups in all of Europe. So it's no wonder why democracy, it's no wonder why Nigeria, which honestly should be an African superpower, is lagging behind in so many areas when it really shouldn't be like that, right? Botswana has a very developed democracy, but if I'm not mistaken, I think upwards of like 70% of the population are one ethnic group. They're all Tswana, and so there's not as much competition between the different ethnic groups whenever it comes time for an election or when it comes time to implement laws. You don't have to worry about that as much. Same thing with like places like Namibia, which 50% of the population is one ethnic group. Ovimbundu, I think that's how you say it. There's other parts of, and then there's other ethnic groups there. And then you have like white Germans who live there and some other people. But for the most part, the diversity doesn't reach the levels it does in other parts. So you're not going to have the same constant struggle for power as you would in other parts of Africa. And that's at its core, that's really the issue. That's really the issue. Africa needs, for it to develop properly, it needs something more. I don't want to use the word dictatorial because that's really not what I'm advocating for. I don't believe in dictatorship. I think dictatorship is degenerate, just like democracy. But what I believe in, I know that most people would call it dictatorship anyway, so I'll just use that terminology. But really, that's not what we're looking for here. That's what diverse societies need, ultimately. That's what they need. And I also say that's part of the reason why South America is the way it is, because South America has a lot of genetic diversity. You have mestizos, you have castizos, then you have this literal white people who live there, who are descendants of colonizers, but also maybe European immigrants from last century. And then you have natives who inhabit there, right? And then you also have black people who were brought there via the transatlantic slave trade. And then you also have all different types of immigrants that came there, because there's a lot of Arab and Japanese immigrants all throughout Latin America. And so when you have all of that, just that fusion of cultures, there's no way democracy can work. It can't. Everyone just thinks their group's the best. We need to be on top. We need to rule. And they're going to seek and try to subvert everyone else. And they may say, no, I don't want to do that. And here's the thing. Here's the really messed up part. They may not try it. They may not try to do it directly. They may not even be aware of doing it. But in some cultures, the in-group bias is so strong, and it's so like inherent to the culture. They don't even notice that they're doing it. They don't notice it, or maybe they don't even think of it as wrong. You know, um, so that's kind of the sole point I want to make about this. I will expand on this further in another video, but yes, thank you for watching.